Hello and welcome to Media Monitor, the show that monitors and evaluates the journalism behind the news stories in the country and internationally. My name is Peter Ndoro, and here's what's coming up on this week's show. Now, following the Sunday Times front page story last week, and dare I say this week as well, exposing an alleged plot by former President Jacob Zuma and some senior ANC party members to oust President Cyril Ramaphosa, well, today we take a look at how the media is telling the story of the ANC. Now, this last week also saw the 41st anniversary of the death in police custody of the man widely regarded as the father of the Black consciousness movement, Bantu Stephen Biko. We'll be taking a look back on his life and how his story has been told. Now, a question that we'll also be exploring is how far does freedom of expression go in terms of the newspaper cartoons? Yeah, the furore broke out this week with the depiction of Serena Williams having a tantrum at the US Open final. Now, was the cartoon fair comment or did it cross a line? We'll find out a little bit later on. But first, let's take a look at the Sunday newspaper headlines, and this is what you're waking up to. Starting with the Sunday Times this morning, it's leading with, surprise, surprise, a story about ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule, who's in a hot mess apparently over his controversial meeting with former President Jacob Zuma. Well, tomorrow Magashule is due to attend a meeting of the ANC's National Working Committee. It's NWC, where he's been asked to explain himself yet again. Now, the matter is also expected to be discussed at the party's National Executive Committee on September the 28th. So that's the Sunday Times. The City Press, well, that's carrying a story about President Cyril Ramaphosa's bitter opponents within the ruling party, coming after his deputy, David Mabuza, and are working hard to prevent him from returning to his position after next year's elections. Senior sources within the party told City Press that work is underway to ensure that Mabuza does not get the number 2 position on the electoral list when the party concludes the list process, which starts now and will end in December. Well, the Sunday Independent, that's running a story about land. The EFF has set its sights on vast tracts of land owned by South Africa's largest churches, which include the Anglican Church, the Methodist and Dutch Reformed churches. Now, according to EFF, the church, which has acquired land, substantial land actually, over centuries, cannot be exempted from expropriation without compensation. And meanwhile, COPE leader Mosiuoa Lekota, well, he's stumbled into a Twitter storm saying whites did not steal land. Did I hear you cough? Well, the Sunday Tribune leads with a story about COPE leader Mosiuoa Lekota, who spoke to the independent media following a social media frenzy this week, where he was accused of having sold out black people's right to land restitution. Attacked by black Twitter for aligning himself with Afrikaner lobby group AfriForum, black Twitter renamed the man known as Terra to Era Lekota. Now, the Weekend Argus is running with a headline about the battle to control a medical aid fund for municipal workers, with more than 1.2 billion rand in its coffers, and more than 80,000 members will play out in the Western Cape High Court this week. On Tuesday, the court will hear an urgent application from 2 parties seeking the removal of Duduza Kosana, a court-appointed curator accused of handling and restoring the affairs of the beleaguered South African Municipal Medical Aid Scheme. We cross the border to Swaziland, or Eswatini, where the Sunday Observer is leading with a story on how Eswatini Mobile shareholders have been appraised that they will not get any dividend because their company made a loss in its less than a year's operation. Moving to West Africa, Nigeria's Daily Trust runs with a story about a political feud that's playing out between Governor Akomwini Ambode of Lagos State and his political godfather and national leader of the All Progressive Congress, the APC, Asiwaji Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Which had abated the man Babajide Sanwo Olu, currently being tipped to succeed Ambode, is set to make a final declaration of the topmost job in the state. All right, so you've had a look at the newspaper headlines that you're going to be waking up to, and we'll delve into those a little bit later on. But one story that's kind of weaving its way through all of them is the relationship between the African National Congress and the media. Well, that was tested again last week after the Sunday Times newspaper published an article stating that there was a private meeting at a Durban hotel attended by former President Jacob Zuma and ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule and former Northwest Premier Supra Mahumapelo, Secretary General of the Women's League Meyogo Matuba, and KZN Youth League Secretary Tandukolo Sabelo. Now, the meeting was allegedly about hatching a plan to unseat President Cyril Ramaphosa. The ANC has challenged this report and has requested that the paper retract the article. Now, we're joined in studio by political analyst Professor Siepe. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so what do you make of this story? It's got headlines on the Sunday Times again this week. Another paper has kind of picked up on it as well. But when you first saw it last week, did it surprise you? Did you believe it? What was your initial reaction?
Actually, I'm surprised that people get so excited about the reality of this country. First of all, the ANC cannot have it both ways. When it goes out to the voters, it talks about it being a broad church. And what it means is that it has a number of different groupings, which we in the media call factions. So if you are going to have different groups, those groups will meet from time to time to share their perspective about where the organization should be going. So it should be not seen as abnormal that people who share the same views might actually find each other in the same space. Actually, the notion of plots in the ANC is the nature of the politics. I mean, before Jacob Zuma was removed as a president, you have had a number of people meeting, business people, the people who call themselves veterans and all that. But all those people were engaged in the plots. When Thabo Mbeki was removed, it was the plotting. And so you could actually say that people who try to win the heart and soul of the ANC, and they would pursue their own agenda. So let's accept that as normal. When you say you are a broad church, you mean you have a multiplicity of contestation within the organization. But the problem is when you have the media that begins to project some people as devils and angels. So when others meet, it becomes a plot. When the other group meets, it does not become a plot. So I do think that the whole notion of a plot is exaggerated. And you must ask, what does it mean in a democracy? Jacob Zuma was removed by people who plotted within the ANC to remove him. And they did it democratically through the structures. So it's all about gaining an upper hand. But the problem we have here is that the issue of Nasrec for members of the ANC remains unresolved. And when you have one party that wins with a small margin, there's always a temptation, even as we talk about unity, to say, have we really resolved this? So what they've been trying to do is to paper over the tracks and the cracks, instead of saying, can we talk about this and what happened and then put it aside.
You talk about winning by a small margin, almost as if we're talking about the coalition government in Nelson Mandela Bay. This is the same party. They've got the same card. They belong to the same movement. Surely, once an election is done, they fall in line.
Yeah, but this is a test of democracy. It was always easy when you had a party that served as a glue to bring all these other forces. And how do you reconcile people who are communist in the ANC and those who are capitalist? Because they represent different class interests and their orientation is very different. So when you had a party, it prevented them from being all they wanted to be. So when you have a democracy, it allows also a process of contestation. And remember, the ANC did not learn democracy under conditions of oppression because the manner in which they engaged themselves was very different. So what we are seeing here is really, for me, the projection of those who are devils and angels, and the media playing it to that. The ANC could easily have responded to say, what is wrong with comrades meeting? But because they're not able to answer that question, and also because it is presented as a plot, then it creates a crisis within them. But also, remember, after 2 years of vicious and ferocious contestation, there are some people for whom the wounds have not healed. And this is where Cyril Ramaphosa's job was, try to heal, try not to be seen to be taking a side. But I don't think that is being handled, especially when you have the state capture, when you have these other cases. It appears that those who are victorious are being triumphalist. And what you hear right now is that people must go to jail. So if you're a member of the ANC and you hear that and and that seems to be tied towards you, it doesn't engender in you the spirit of saying, let us work together. That is the biggest challenge of the ANC at the moment.
So, can you forgive the public and wondering whether there isn't something sinister going on? You have this meeting, pictures are taken, some people deny they were even there, others are saying no comment, and if you've done nothing wrong, why would you say no comment?
Yeah, but I think this is where the ANC itself has allowed itself to be outsmarted and for the media to set the agenda, because that is what the media does. It sets the agenda, and in doing so, it tests this notion of unity within the ANC. I mean, it must do what it has always done, which is ready to provide that level of critique. But the ANC, it's not the media here. The problem is the ANC is unable to address itself to the challenges that are being posed.
How does the media handle a story like this, in your view?
No, I think for me, the pushing of the story effectively, because what they are saying is that we're making a proposition. We're saying there is a plot. You have to respond to that. And you can respond to say there is no plot, but you could also say, look, we meet as members of the ANC. And Peter, we must actually be concerned that when three people who hold a different position from that is held by the group that has become triumphalist, then we start demonizing those people. Actually, part of the leadership that is sure of itself. If I'm sure of my position, even if you plot, it doesn't matter, because it's not going to work in a democracy, because I know I have numbers on my side. I know that there are democratic processes that you must go through. Yeah. But the mere fact that the ANC even entertains it simply says you're talking about a party that has become paranoid and a party that has become insecure. So it is the insecurity and the paranoia that is...
Are you suggesting that the newspapers, the media, have picked a side and are reporting with a slant?
Oh, no, there's no doubt. I mean, I was reading the newspapers. Every time you see a grouping that is aligned to Jacob Zuma, to Cyril, it is a faction supporting Jacob Zuma, Cyril. But every time you see a grouping that supports Jacob Zuma, it is a cabal. So even the choice of language is meant to say these ones are sinister, these ones are problematic. And I know many people within the ANC who are on both sides, who are good, and I know that there are people who with questionable credentials on both sides. So until the media begins to do what it's supposed to do, to report objectively rather than to take a side. Actually, even within the space of commentators, I mean, I was at Nasrec when the results came. The journalists jumped in excitement because for the last few years, they've already taken a side. They've decided who the enemy is, who the devil is, and the ones that one side won, they actually showed their true colors. So I do think, I mean, let me give you a typical example.
Well, let's do this. I'm going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, hopefully we'll have the journalist who actually wrote the story to defend herself, because you have accused this paper of taking a side. We'll find out after this.
No, I have not accused this paper of taking a side.
But media in general.
Yeah.
Ekurhuleni Artisans and Skills Training Center is a practical artisans and skills development center who equips students with the necessary knowledge and practical experience to enter the labor force as semi-skilled workers. There is a strong focus and need for skills training in specific areas like boiler making, rigging, pipe fitting, welding, CNC programming, plumbing, electrical, air conditioning and refrigeration, bricklaying, carpentry and painting at the center. Ensure your future today with the Ekurhuleni Artisans and Skills Training Center.
Where am I going to sleep now? What about my kids?
There is bribe involved because we're not aware that they will come today.
People are being evicted about 2 months ago in May. We served the first court order. This is private property.
They came to us with a truck that has no water.
How do we build these shacks in a way that we don't have a fire spread when we have a fire incident?
So TB continues to be the top infectious killer worldwide, claiming 4,500 lives a day. It is estimated that approximately 1% of the global population is autistic. So if you're on a medical aid, how well do you understand the benefit structure and how your medical aid generally works? And if you're not on a medical aid, have you considered belonging to one? So how much and what should you know about this condition? Is it curable? Can people living with epilepsy, for instance, play sport, drive cars, get employed? 7 million people around the world die annually as a result of tobacco use.
For Health Tip, catch Health Talk every Saturday from 9 to 10.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, just before the break, Professor Siepe said that the media is choosing certain words depending on which faction is being represented in this breaking story of which must say, I suppose, shows this unity project of the ANC perhaps not working as well as that they had hoped. And this, of course, last week's Sunday Times and this week's Sunday Times continue with this story of this meeting between the faction known as the one that supported Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, led by, allegedly, former President Jacob Zuma to try and oust President Cyril Ramaphosa. Well, one of the authors of that report is Juanita Hunter, Sunday Times journalist and political analyst. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having
So
me.
last weekend, people woke up, they saw this newspaper headline, exposed plot. This week, ace in a hole. So what's happened between last weekend and this week?
Well, we know that the ANC denied the story almost immediately, coming out, rubbishing the report, rubbishing us as the journalists who wrote the report. On Monday, the ANC's top six had a meeting, and then on Tuesday almost, the tune changed. And the Secretary General of the ANC then admitted to the meeting, but then sort of said certain things, like it was an organizational meeting. He said he only met with former President Jacob Zuma at his own behest. It was organizational matters. He said he went to KwaZulu-Natal to deal with issues in the Moses Mabhida region. And he also said that he met with Dudu Myeni. Yes, he did, but it was a meeting only because she insisted she had sent him numerous messages. Now, that was the version he gave the media after he had given that version to the top six. Now, today in the Sunday Times, what we seek to do is we've now spoken to people who are actually in the meetings. People are starting to sing, and people are saying, no, we were in that meeting, in those meetings, and that's not actually what happened. We had a very, determined goal. We have been, people use the word that we've been attacked. We've accepted the outcomes of Nazareth, yet constantly in NEC meetings, our faction, so to say, has been attacked. And so now it's a matter of organizing ourselves and getting together some sort of strategy, which means filling the lists of the ANC with people who sort of align themselves in the anti-Cyril Ramaphosa faction, and then at the same time have a preferred candidate in the youth league.
So bottom line, do you trust the people that are leaking these details to you?
It's it's not only about people who are leaking details. We've obviously did our own investigation. After last week's story, people have then realized that there is no way to spin this. This was the objective. There was a coordinator, people were brought to the province, and so now people are admitting that, yes, I was in the meeting. If you read the story, there's a provincial leader of the ANC that says he actually was aware, somehow he was given updates of the meeting, and he actually made the Thuli House aware of this meeting on Thursday already. Obviously, he's preferred leaders in the Thuli House, but if you follow the narrative and if you follow the type of people that we've spoken to in this story and the story before, you won't think that it's one side leaking stories against the other, as we've seen in the run-up to Nasraq. Here, it's people from within the faction that are actually clarifying their purposes.
Are they trying to exonerate themselves, or what's happening? Why would they suddenly break ranks?
I don't think it's about breaking ranks. I think last week the story sort of exposed the plan, and now it's a matter of sort of putting it on record in some way that, you know, they may not want Ramaphosa out entirely. They just want to frustrate his processes, almost to come forward with an admitting. And I think the reality is people can't deny it anymore. Last week they denied it, and then the top six really, you know, got the truth out of Ace Magashule.
So you think you've got the story nailed now. Prof, you're going to leave us shortly.
Yeah.
What would be your biggest question to Juanita?
No, it's not so much of a question. I mean, I think the question that you asked is quite correct. The issue here is that there is a faction, like I said, the ANC is made of a number of factions. There's a faction that has won, that has become victorious, and has become triumphalist. And this is one of the things that both Mandela and others have always said. In the ANC, if we are a broad church, those who win must actually act in a manner that does not frustrate others. So there is a group that feels that even though we have bought, as she rightfully says, we bought into this notion of unity, but we see actions that seems to be targeting us in the NEC, in the media, etc. So you can't, if you find yourself consistently attacked and maligned as a member of the organization, you would actually try to say, how do we begin to talk about this so that either we fight back or we frustrate, but also we bring to the attention. I don't think this is something that the ANC must pretend it does not exist. Because when you do that, then you have this notion of people meeting. But for me, the biggest problem that I have is when the ANC cannot defend its members to talk about their issues and to address their own issues. And I also have a problem with when you start having three people who are aligned, then it must always be reduced to a plot. Because I do think that in politics, for anything to happen requires people of the same mind to meet and discuss that. So the problem here is, as like I said, the problem is not the journalist. The journalists have a job to ask questions, but also to make a proposition as a way of asking the question. It's only when you are unable to present a proper answer that then you get into all sorts of things, instead of shouting at the messenger. But the other point that I made, as I say, when I was at Nasraq, when the outcome came, I saw journalists jumping with excitement because they had already taken a position. And it is not a secret that there are people in this country who are seen as angels. I mean, there's a simple question that we should be asking ourselves. You had Pravin giving a number of presentations all over, and he appeared before BBC. He was asked a simple question by a BBC journalist, which is something that should have been asked by us. So say, Chief, with all this information, do you have a shred of evidence? And for the first time, Pravin could not answer the question because he was asked a question that says, you, not any other person, with the information that you have, do you have a simple shred of evidence? And I asked myself, what prevented the universities, the commentators, analysts, Professor to ask a simple question like that?
We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us, as always. And we look forward to the next time we sit face to face. Thanks very much indeed, sir.
You're welcome.
All right, we take a quick break. After this, Steve Biko. 41 years ago, he died in police custody. We talk about his life and the story and how it was told.
started, and we want people to take action. We want government to take action, because women are being raped, women are being killed, women are being sexually and physically abused every day. Children are going missing.
See men at the forefront of this march is what softens the heart and makes us all feel proud of the type of men that we have in our country.
Here, the rates of violence against women and children are alarmingly high. Enough is enough.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, this week marked the 41st year since the father of the Black Consciousness Movement, Bantu Stephen Biko, was killed in police custody on the 13th of September 1977. South Africa's apartheid-era government announced that Biko had died in his cell at a Pretoria prison after a long hunger strike. Let's listen to the reaction from Jimmy Kruger, who is the Minister of Justice and Police in the cabinet of Prime Minister John Vorster.
On the 12th of September, that's the following day, he was again examined by a district surgeon and medically treated in Pretoria. That particular night, he was found to be dead in the cell.
Well, that was his reaction at the time. Kruger's account of the events were found to be untrue after then journalist Helen Ziller used interviews and medical records as proof in her report that brain damage was likely the cause of Biko's death. Another journalist, Tracy Mackey, helped reveal the identity of Gideon Nieuwoord, one of the security branch policemen, as being involved in Biko's murder. Mackey was bestowed this year in April with the National Order, the Order of Ikamanga, in bronze for her contribution towards journalism in South Africa. Her investigation contradicted the apartheid government's inquest finding that the police were not guilty of his murder. She joins us now from our Port Elizabeth studios. And very good morning to you, Tracy. Thanks very much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's lovely to be here from Port Elizabeth this morning.
And here in studio we have clinical psychologist and political activist Professor Sats Cooper. Thanks very much for joining us, and welcome to you as well.
My pleasure.
All right, so, and I know that you were very close to Steve Biko, but I'm going to start in PE where Tracy is because if I remember the story correctly, you were quite surprised by the confession that Gideon Nieuwoord made to you on the phone. Take us back to that time and how we realized that the police were involved in Biko's murder.
Peter, everybody knew that the police were obviously involved, but the big question was, when were the true perpetrators going to be identified? Gideon Nieuwoord had been linked to other apartheid crimes, and obviously being in Port Elizabeth, I had harassed him continuously over which crimes, what he was going to apply for amnesty to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And Saturday morning, Weekend Post, I phoned him and asked, I've heard that you're going to apply for amnesty for Biko's death. And he was clearly frustrated. He was just frustrated, and in a moment of weakness, he screamed at me over the telephone. Oh, actually, it was Goniwe. We had heard he was going to apply for amnesty for Goniwe. I said, I heard you're going to apply for amnesty for Goniwe, and just out of sheer frustration, he screamed, I didn't do Goniwe, I did Biko. And I paused. I said, excuse me, are you telling me you killed Steve Biko? He says, I've told you, Macy, I did Biko, not Goniwe. I think it was a shock. I unfortunately couldn't leave the newsroom because I was editing that morning. But he did agree to speak to one of our journalists, Beverly Garson, who spoke to him at Port Elizabeth Airport. He was a frightening man. I didn't like him. And that in itself just indicated to me what he had done to not just Steve Biko, but Simpiwe and Mkulu, excuse me, and so many others.
So tell us how difficult it was being a journalist at that time. I mean, to tell a story like this, to go against the government, I mean, all sort of the gates of hell almost must have opened soon afterwards.
I think as journalists, having operated during the state of emergency as we had done until then, 1994 brought a release. I mean, we were free. We were free to report on what we wanted to. I think the realization when we saw the millions of people lining up to vote was an indication that we didn't need to be scared anymore. And so there was this euphoric feeling of freedom in 1994 as a journalist. Well, for me anyway, and I'm sure I speak for many of my colleagues. Port Elizabeth had always been a hot spot, and dating back to 1984 when I was a young journalist of 18 years old. So it wasn't so much fear, it was absolute euphoria that we could at least report on what has been happening. And that was important, and it was a triumph for us as journalists.
All right, Tracy, we're going to come back to you just now, but I'm going to ask Sath Cooper now. Thanks very much for joining us, and we're going to take you back in time. You know, people say that Steve Biko was the father of the Black Consciousness movement, but I do understand that you met him many times. People like Harry Nengwekulu, Srini Moodley, Bani Pichiana, that you would meet and talk, and that from these conversations that the idea of Black consciousness came through. How did the Black consciousness movement thinking came to be?
One correction, and I think it's also about how the media portrays things. In the introduction, it said 13th. It's actually the 12th of September that he was murdered.
No, I think that was the date of the announcement.
Oh, the announcement. Okay, good. Yes, Steve Biko was a student at medical school in Natal, and the rest of us were students in other institutions. He began the discussion in that period that I actually entered University College, and various encounters happened, but it would be doing him a disservice not to acknowledge that his writings were seminal, and that, you know, the tendency to diminish, particularly from those of us who would like to get the credit, is wrong. Yes, he, like Plato, engaged, and we argued and so on, but his writings are his. And importantly, he wrote when he was in his early 20s and until his banning when he was 26. So from 23 to 26, the tome of his work was written unlike anybody else. And I'd like to draw the analogy that there are two homegrown products in this country of ideology. One, apartheid, which has its antecedents in Nazism and other race supremacist ideology, and Black consciousness, its antithesis, which is homegrown, but also has its origins in other struggles elsewhere, the student struggles in the late 60s elsewhere, the Black Panther movement and so on. And not to acknowledge that is actually to be denialist. The period that this happened, the media, there was only one electronic media, that was the SABC. There was no television until post-70s, you know, at some point in 76 or 77. The media tended to be white-controlled and representing images and voices that were of the status quo or its opposition. Until fairly recently, probably I would take it to the change in ownership of the independent newspapers group. We would have been forgiven for opening our newspapers and thinking we were somewhere in Europe. Now our media is fully African. We're in the southern tip of the African continent. So we need to locate this, how we present figures and how we tend to diminish them. But that proponent of black affirmation could not be tolerated by a lot of journalists who tended to be white.
We're running out of time, and what I do want to get is, do you think his whole story has been told properly over time? Because, you know, we all have two sides, good and bad.
Sure.
Do you think that we know Steve Biko?
Oh, yes. Look, many of us who were with him from the late 60s know this was not a saint, but he loved life, larger than life. And his murder is important. Cyril Ramaphosa, in his memorial on Friday, referred to the murder, and there are those people who were directly implicated or who are accomplices who are still alive. And perhaps by laying those charges, which I think the family is going to do any time now, the truth will come out.
All right. And Tracy, perhaps a final thought and word from you as someone who's worked as a journalist a whole life. Do you think that the Biko story has been told over time, and do you think that by 2018 we now kind of have a good idea of who he was and what he meant?
I think I agree with what's been said, is that Biko's story is yet unfolding, and to a degree the media has shared much with us, and media is wide. You know, media is not just about what you hear on television or in those days, for us as South Africans it was the radio or what you read in the newspapers, but you know, in preparing for today, I came across an open letter by Simpiwe Dana, who also comes from the Eastern Cape. I incidentally grew up in King Williamstown. So for me, Biko, although I had never met him, I was a little girl of 12 when he died, he was very real. I remember Mrs. Biko as a nursing sister in King Williamstown. So for me, he was a real human being. And we still have a lot to learn from people like Biko, as we have from many other struggle veterans. But Simpiwe Dana, I think, sums up a lot of the questions we need to ask today and puts into context Biko and his story. She wrote an open letter to the Mail and Guardian, and it was entitled, "I miss your voice and your reason. I miss your voice of reason." And in that letter, and I'd actually appeal to people to read it. It's long, but it actually sets into perspective the questions we need to ask ourselves today, posed by Biko's teachings. And you know, people often look and think, I'm a white woman. I learned about Biko when I was a little girl in suburbia, a privileged white girl. But you know, Biko has a lot to teach white people today as well. And I think we need to read his work. We need to read the work, and we need to read the stories of many white struggle veterans. He wrote his Frank Talk. He wrote his own book, I Write What I Like. And my challenge to so many people today is read Biko, read about struggle veterans, because they have so much to teach us and they are so relevant to our lives today.
All right, so Tracy, thanks very, very much indeed for talking to us and helping us remember Steve Biko. Thanks so much indeed for your time. And to my guest here in Johannesburg, Professor Thats Cooper, always a pleasure talking to you. I wish we could have talked for much longer, but I will call you soon. You know me. We'll have another chat. Thank you so much again for taking us down memory lane. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we take another look at the newspapers, and also up ahead, Serena Williams and a new cartoon.
Did you know that the Nile River is actually 6,695 kilometers long? With such a length, the Nile is speculated to be the longest river in the world. It winds from Uganda to Ethiopia, flowing through a total of 9 countries. While the Nile River is often associated with Egypt, it actually touches Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Sudan, as well as Egypt. One of the most well-known facts is the Nile River's ability to produce extremely fertile soil, which made it easy for cities and civilizations to spring up along its banks.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor, and we're going to try and look very quickly at some of the newspaper headlines that are in the papers today. And I'm joined by Juanita Hunter from the Sunday Times, and also a cartoonist with the Sowetan, Sifiso Yalo. Thanks very much for joining us, Juanita. We met you just before the break. Sifiso, thanks very much for joining us, and welcome.
It's good to be here, brother.
All right, so, you know, some people look at cartoons and they think that, you know, you're just drawing pictures, but it says journalism, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a visual journalism,
yeah.
And it goes way beyond that. It takes a lot of time to do, like the thinking-wise, the thinking part of it. Yeah,
all right.
The drawing part is easy.
Yes,
yeah.
The actual thinking of what I need to say with that drawing is,
yeah,
the
it
key.
starts way early. You have to read and understand.
All right,
lots of stories in all angles.
We're going to get your insights when we talk about Serena in just a few moments, but let's talk about the Sunday newspapers. And Juanita, we've kind of dealt with your story. Is there anything else that took your attention?
Yes, it's a story that's in the Sunday Times, but I see it also in the City Press about Mmusi Maimane nominating himself as the Western Cape Premier candidate.
Wow.
It's fascinating because there was a process and people submitted their names, and today the DA was going to announce who their candidate was for the Western Cape. Now, in terms of their election analysis, you know, the Western Cape is obviously clinched, and then they had their eyes set on Gauteng and the Northern Cape. Now, the leader of the opposition, Mmusi Maimane, you know, decided at the 11th hour that he should be the candidate to replace Helen Zille. Now, this really, really caught people by surprise. I mean, the public may be surprised by it, but it's fascinating to see that the DA leader in the Western Cape is really, really unhappy about it. Bonginkosi Madigizela told the Sunday Times that he expected Maimane to use his clout in other provinces. He couldn't understand why Maimane would make this decision, particularly because the DA in the Western Cape is sort of on solid ground.
Is it because it's a safe seat, Sifiso?
Well, it is a safe seat,
yeah.
But I mean, I've expected this thing from Maimane. He's clashing his straws, the way I say it. Yeah.
Wow. So, what other story grabbed your attention in the Sunday papers?
There was a story on page 8, I believe. But
of which paper?
School violence, the Sunday Times.
Yeah, Sunday Times. Yeah.
It's really a scary thought that like 12% of students, they've experienced violence in schools.
Right.
And the other 4% have actually been sexually harassed, the other 4% raped. It's a scary thought.
So now this violence, is this children beating up other children? What are we talking about?
The way I see it, it's both ways, because you've got teachers that are scared of children now.
Yeah.
They bring guns to school, they actually shoot the guns. The question is, where do they get these guns? How do they get the knives inside the schools?
And of course, this is because of this week in Zeerust, this teacher that was stabbed by a student who, I think the incident happened the day before. He went home,
and the other student actually brought a gun to school.
What has changed, do you think? You know, I was scared of my teachers. I had the thought of...
when I was at school, I mean, the mere fact of even confronting a teacher on a specific subject was a no-no. We did what we were told at the time that we were told about.
Wow.
But I also think to some degree that it shows the sort of the state of society and just, you know, how bad things have gone and how broken we are as South Africans. You know, these stats are actually, you know, incredibly heartbreaking. And for a teacher to you know, to go to school and feel unsafe by the kids that they have to interact with on a daily basis, it's just sort of, you know, terrifying to see other teachers, you know, speaking out and saying they actually fear for their lives. And at what point do we normalize this as a society?
All right, so if I let you, you're going to talk only about the stories in the Sunday Times. So let's talk about some of the other newspapers. The church is being told to give up land. Now, this is a surprise for me. This is the Sunday Independent front page. I didn't know that the churches owned land. Did you?
Well, if you can see the churches that we have, almost every corner in townships, in town, they've got big land. They always get the space of like 2 blocks.
Do you think it's fair game that their land should be expropriated without compensation?
But who owns the actual church land to start with?
So the EFF has an interesting approach to just say there will be no one exempt from this, whether you're the clergy, whether you're the state, whether everyone should give up their land. And we know that the ANC has said that they don't believe in the nationalization approach, and their approach on expropriation is for redistribution. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this sort of manifests now when Parliament, you know, finalizes its works. But it's quite interesting how the EFF is sort of you know, pulling no punches and saying everyone is going to be affected, no matter who you are. And it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to this. Particularly, we saw when the high panel led by former President Kgalema Motlanthe said about you know, traditional leaders ruling like tin pot dictators in relation to communal land, and when they were discussing the issue of land tenure. And we saw that the Zulu King and other traditional leaders really getting upset. So I kind of suspect that we're going to see the same thing from the church.
So let's come to your area of expertise. Serena Williams was depicted in some cartoons this week. And, you know, people are split in terms of whether her behavior was out of order or not out of order. But it looks as if that some of her depictions and some of the way that the cartoons were drawn might have been racist and crossed the line in terms of fair comment. What is your thoughts on some of the cartoons that you've seen?
Almost all the cartoons I've seen, they center around her physique, hair being particularly black. And, well, cartoonists, we exaggerate. So they exaggerate her power, the position she is. But I would say it's just clear laziness, the way I see it.
So how else would they have drawn this one? Because I'm looking at this, and to be honest with you...
The point is missed now, because the cartoon has migrated from making a point to being about race. It's no longer about what she was doing. It's about who she is. It's about the color of her skin.
But I also think that it has to do about depicting a black woman as an angry person, as someone who's not entitled to say her views. It's almost as if someone else had to you know, sort of fight back, or another sportsman, it would be celebrated. But the way she was depicted, it's almost to fit in that stereotype of just another angry black woman, and I think it was in poor taste.
Okay, so you both agree that it was poor.
It was in poor taste. It's laziness, clear laziness. If you want to make a point, I mean, it's easy to shock someone. But to make them think, to actually make someone think, it takes a lot of brain power.
All right. You know what? Unfortunately, we always run out of time, and this is where we're going to have to leave it. But thanks very much indeed for your insights and talking to us. Juanita Hunter and Sifiso Yalo. To you both, thanks. And to you at home, thanks so much for tuning in. You've been watching Media Monitor. Let's do it again at the same time next week. In the meantime, have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Township under siege, roads blockaded, and the atmosphere here remains tense. Residents want their houses damaged by the storms repaired.
Raids are coming. Who's going to repair my furniture?
Police remain vigilant.
We may never have sufficient members, but the members that we have, we are comfortable with them. We are in a position to deal with the situation.
From us also as councillors, we lack information as it's not cascaded to us.
We are losing the best of kids. People that are fathers or pastors that comes from a church.